Welcome to American Democracy Forum, powered by the Fulcrum and Citizen Connect. I'm Ogabalta, Director of Solutions Journalism and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with the Fulcrum. A daily cross-partisan news publication, the Fulcrum engages citizens in evolving government to better meet the needs of all people. To that end, we strive to share many perspectives to widen the viewpoint of our readers. For this episode, I'm happy to introduce you to Sylvia Puente, President and CEO of the Latino Policy Forum, a nonprofit that advocates for equity, justice, and economic prosperity for Latinos in Chicago and Illinois through public policy advocacy and analysis on issues including education, housing, and immigration. Sylvia is also a longtime colleague and friend. Sylvia, welcome to the program.
Good to see you, Hugo.
Let's begin with more details about the forum's work. Give us some details about public policy advocacy and analysis on the aforementioned areas of emphasis.
Oh, Hugo, there's so much, and it's sort of hard to break down public policy because I think sometimes the layperson knows that it really impacts them but doesn't really quite know how, right? So let me give a couple examples from what we're working on now. I'm in the state of Illinois, and our work is focused on the state of Illinois, particularly public policy impact in our state capital. So the state right now is been in a multi-year process to think about how do you create a formula in education, for higher education, that provides equity for institutions of higher education. So it's called the Higher Education Funding Formula. It's a little complicated, but the idea is that not all public universities have adequate resources to educate students, especially students who may be first generation, low income, or come from disadvantaged backgrounds. So it's a very complicated process where the inputs to the formula might include how many low income students, how many first generation students, but then the money goes to the university. So my staff are sitting at the table with the legislators, all the public universities, trying to figure out how do we make this more equitable so that we make sure that Latino students aren't forgotten about, we make sure first generation students aren't forgotten about, we make sure that undocumented students aren't forgotten about. And we make sure that as universities get more resources, how will we make sure many of those resources go to the students who most need them, through student supportive services, through mental health services. So that's big picture, but how do you literally write language and law and a formula that makes all of that happen? It can be a little complicated. We're also in the process of releasing right now the state, at our urging, our State Department of Education did an analysis on how do we create more dual language programs for children enrolled in K through 12 education. And so we're really pleased that a report was just issued on that, and that we were a part of conceptualizing that, doing some of the analysis for that. But it is a report issued by the state, which of course carries a lot of weight. So we're obviously eagerly waiting to see how school districts are going to implement that to have more dual language learners so that more of our children can be multilingual. And our bottom line agenda on that is that we want children who come to school speaking another language, particularly Spanish, for that to be seen as an asset on their educational trajectory, because it is too often looked at as a deficit. I'll stop there, but there are certainly other examples if you have other questions.
Yeah, and as it is in Cook County in the city of Chicago, the public school system, the majority are Latinos. And as you've mentioned, many of them are first generation and English isn't their first language. But in the United States, to your point of getting resources, not only for these first generation Latinos, but also for educators to also be bilingual and leaning in on Spanish language. The United States is the second country that has most people outside of speaking English, of course, that speak Spanish. So we are living in a Spanish-speaking country per se, because I believe the only other country that has the number of Spanish-speaking people is Mexico. So of the more than 20 Spanish-speaking countries, the United States is number two. And so it's so important to provide those insights and evidence through analysis to then arm policymakers to either introduce legislation or discuss solutions that really have an impact, as you said, with the populace.
And to also elevate the conversation, given everything you just said, Hugo, this report will elevate the conversation because the report is coming from our State Board of Education. It will promote the dialogue in school districts. Oh, do we have a dual language program? Have we thought about it? What will it take to implement it, right? So it's also elevating the dialogue. And while a lot of our work is in education, Hugo, as you know, one of our other big initiatives has been how we think about the issue of homelessness and how we think about the issue of homelessness, particularly in the Latino community. So we've come up with this concept and this term, and I don't think it's unique to us, of called double-dip homelessness. Because Latino homelessness, unlike other communities, not to say that there aren't Latino folks literally sleeping in tents and on the streets, and I think we've seen dramatic increases of that, not just in Chicago, but all over the country. But there's a phenomena that we call a hidden homelessness. A Latino families may be homeless, but they're couch surfing, they're living in a relative's basement, they're living on the couch, but effectively they're doing that because they can't afford to have a home. So it is called doubled-up homelessness. So we've done a rigorous analysis of all the different state housing programs to look at what their definitions of homelessness are, to see if we can get some of those definitions revised so that resources can be dedicated to families who are in doubled-up homelessness to help them find a home, whether it be an apartment or buying a home. But to do that, there's not a lot of awareness. And as we think about public policy, the first stage of public policy is elevating awareness of the issue so that people hear it not as just a concern, but a problem that needs to be addressed. And so working with you and others, we have really tried to elevate the dialogue so that it becomes more commonly understood through media and through other kinds of reporting to be done to elevate this issue of doubled-up homelessness.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that it is clear that elevating awareness is so important. And for our audience, I am the publisher of the Latino News Network, a partner of the Fulcrum, and also a partner with the Latino Policy Forum in elevating awareness. We've been working on a 2-year project in producing stories that really shed light on this invisible population of people that are not defined as homeless because they're not living in the street. But these are people that are living with others in space that is not often suitable for the amount of people that are living in that space, and they're sleeping on their friends and family's couches. So in creating this awareness, we are partnering with the forum in leveraging that analysis and also speaking and elevating the visibility and voices of this invisible population in order to affect and elevate the conversations that are being had and providing them the right resources that they need in order to move forward.
And Hugo, not to get too wonky, and if I am, stop me, but when we think about public policy, the first thing we need to do is to create change. The first thing you need to do is to create awareness, and that's what this project has really been about. After you create awareness, you move to the stage of creating will, because there's a lot of issues out there that public policymakers and legislators can deal with. But if the political will isn't there to create change, then change is never going to happen. So then you've got to create the momentum to say this is a serious enough issue. We got to talk to legislators. We give them the articles. Here's background on the issue. You create the will, and then the third stage is then how do you have action? Does that mean that we need to create new legislation? Does that mean we need to take existing programs and advocate for more money for them? Does that mean we need to change the definition so that those that are eligible are not just homeless on the street, but also homeless people who are experiencing doubled-up what's going to be our policy lever for change, and then how do we move forward? And that's really some of the broader work that the Latino Policy Forum is involved in.
Yeah, absolutely. Creating will and then that will turning into action. Soon after Donald Trump was declared the 47th President of the United States, you issued a statement on behalf of the forum that read in part, I want those in our community who are worried about their safety and the safety of their families to know this. The Latino Policy Forum has always spoken truth, advocated for justice, acted with civility and integrity, and put trust in democracy. We are here for you. I'd love if you could share perhaps some of those concerns and about a second Trump term, especially when it comes to working in the area that the you and the forum work in regards to education, immigration, to name two of the forum's core issues.
Well, certainly we, like many others, have a lot of we are a nonpartisan organization, so let me start with that. But we also have to take politicians at their word in terms of what they say that they're going to do. So just two examples on that. He has talked about doing a lot to disinvest the Department of Education. And so obviously education is key and important, not just to the Latino community, but I think to all Americans nationwide. And if there are fewer resources, if there are the federal Department of Education provides grants to states in a variety of different areas. And if we dismantle the Department of Education, if we dismantle any of those grant programs, that will mean fewer resources coming to our state and coming into our schools. That is our concern, because everyone at the local level is concerned about their local property taxes and don't want them to go up. But if we have fewer federal resources coming in, the other big way we fund education is through increased property taxes. So there could be an adverse effect. And then obviously the other big concern is that the president-elect has said that he will declare a national emergency and begin to implement mass deportations across the country. We know that certainly there are unauthorized people who live in the United States, some who are recent arrivals, some who have been here for many, many, many decades. And so there is palpable fear and concern in many Latino communities about how that process is going to unfold. And will they do roundups? Will they do workplace raids? Will families feel safe sending their children to school and have concerns about immigration authorities coming to schools and to workplaces and to churches and to hospitals and coming into our neighborhoods? And this is a concern, I think, not just for those who are unauthorized living in the U.S., but also if he's going to do mass deportations, as he has said, and round people up, then what is the probability of someone who looks like you or I, who are U.S. citizens, getting caught up in that as well? Will it be a violation of people's rights because of the way they look? We should all have grave concerns about that with respect to our civil liberties in this country and how that's going to play out in the new administration.
Yeah, and I think that everything you said is very important, and this is not hypothetical. This has happened before, unfortunately, in our nation's history, not just with Latinos but with other communities of color. And I think it's also very important, and it's a responsibility in part of the media not to produce one-dimensional narratives that often perpetuate this misinformation about who and what a Hispanic Latino is in the United States, because it's often categorized, they're caricatures of a community that's very diverse. It's not necessarily foreign-born person. The majority of Hispanic Latinos in the United States, per the census, are U.S.-born. And people who are undocumented in the United States are not necessarily, and the majority isn't, people who have crossed over, who, by the way, beginning with the Venezuelan community, of which of late in the last couple of years, there's been an influx number of them, they're asylum seekers. So they're not here in this country illegally, but many of them came to the country legally, but because the system is so disorganized. They became undocumented because the process and the bureaucracy is such that that's the situation they find themselves. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, as we've mentioned before, in creating awareness and also using that awareness and information to power lawmakers, policymakers in doing the right thing, right? In making sure that these decisions are being done judiciously.
And certainly there's concerns at the national level around this. And to your point, Hugo, we know that in last time our president-elect was president, one of the first things he instituted was a Muslim ban. And that was taken to court and eventually unfounded. We know that he spoke a lot about the role of Haitians in U.S. society. So this is an issue that's going to impact many, many, many communities, not just those from Mexico or from Latin America.
Yeah. And create fear, as you've mentioned, and as we've seen previously, sometimes that fear turning into violence against all people that.
And so we're fortunate again. We're in Illinois, right? We're fortunate in that we live in a blue state where our governor and our mayor are reinforcing us as a sanctuary city and a sanctuary state. That's not going to be true across the nation. But even with that, there are definitely parts of Illinois that voted red. And so we have our team looking at immigration law in Illinois to see if there are pieces of that we can strengthen. So one of the things, and if you want to go and want me to stop, just let me know, Hugo, but one of the things that we expect to happen is that previous Democratic and the current Democratic administration has in place what's called the Sensitive Places Memo, which means that if you do raids or if ICE goes to place to identify and round up undocumented people, that they won't go to a church, they won't go to a school, they won't go to a courthouse, right? We expect that memo to be undone so that it will not only just create fear in terms of ICE, but should I go to the hospital? Because what if ICE comes to the hospital? Should I go to school? Should I even go to church, right? Those are really, really key concerns. So in Illinois, we're looking at legislation and looking what exists to see what we can strengthen so that at least the state will be asking and stating to law enforcement that they do not cooperate with ICE raids, at least in doing roundups in some of these quote-unquote sensitive places.
A lot of work ahead for the forum and for many in regard to the a second Trump administration. Now, the forum, I mean, I was going to say, had a very busy year. When doesn't the forum have a busy year? But I wanted to ask you, in the long list of accomplishments, are there any highlights that you'd like to share with us about some of those accomplishments in 2024?
Boy, in 2024, well, as I mentioned, we're negotiating this higher education funding formula. Illinois has just created a brand new Department of Early Childhood Education. It has taken parts of 3 different agencies to try to consolidate, to simplify, eventually to make services for children birth to 5 more accessible and easy for parents to navigate. Now, we're really, really proud that in that legislation, my team working on that legislation, Illinois is now the first state in the nation to codify the provision of services, education services to children birth to 5. So we're the only state in the nation that says all children birth to 5 can receive early education regardless of their immigration status. So we're the first. So we will enable and protect all children's right to an education. No other state in the nation has done that. We just released. We have a research partner that we've worked on with, and my team conceptualized, we fundraised, and we helped lead an advisory group to design a research study that just came out that was done by one of our research partners that basically looks at the progress of English language learners in learning English at the high school level. And what we found is that long-term English learners by high school were outperforming academically their English-speaking peers. So again, busting the narrative that speaking a second language is a deficit, they are actually have improved attendance, improved test scores that are better than their English-speaking peers. Now that's true for the long-term English language learners. We also know that Illinois has had a recent influx of students at the high school level, many of them the Venezuelan, due to the recent migrant crisis and situation, who are just coming into a high school for the first time. Their educational outcomes are going to be challenged. We know because they're still in the process of learning English. But it gives us information and research and data that we didn't have before. Also really proud of the work that our team did. Illinois and Chicago is one of the hubs for receiving the new migrants. We put together a coalition that literally for the past 2.5 years has met every other week. We have 100 providers coming to share resources, to share information, to coordinate services, to be able to serve the new migrants in our state of Illinois. And we've seen some amazing partnerships come out of that. Training for mental health, not just for the migrants, but for the people who work with them, and many, many other successes.
That's great. Congratulations on all of that great work and in leading that work. And one of the things that resonates with me when you mentioned about the studies about bilingual education and how that's shown to improve the performance of those students. We're also talking about non-Latinos because in this country, hablar el español no es un lujo, es una necesidad. No matter whether it's for, people see English as a second language or learning Spanish as helping a foreign-born person. But if you want to, there's no industry, you can walk from New York to Los Angeles, and you're going to come across, no matter how large the city or how small, a Latino. So if you want to conduct business, speaking Spanish is actually something very beneficial.
Well, not only that, Hugo, what we haven't elevated at all in this debate, and certainly the news media hasn't, is the extent to which this low-wage labor market subsidizes middle-class way of life. Every time you see that Latino busboy, your meal is cheaper. Every time you eat a salad, it's because primarily a Latino farm worker picked that product. So we're not looking yet or talking enough about the unintended consequences of what this perceived mass deportation might look like, given the regrettably the high number of Latinos that work in the low-wage labor market. Who I also want to mention another accomplishment that we're very proud of. Our senior research fellow, Dr. Nergreen Segru, has just started writing a twice-a-month column for Forbes on the Latino wealth gap. We're a small little bitty organization in Chicago. Last year, we did a study with Brookings on the Latino wealth gap. And Forbes came to us and said, no, Latinos now are 1 out of 5 people in the whole nation. And no one is writing about the economic mobility or the wealth gap situation of the Latino community on a consistent basis. So I would also urge your viewers to go to Forbes, Noreen Shagru, and subscribe to that column that will be looking at various aspects of the wealth gap into the coming year.
Now, your personal list of accomplishments is as long as the forum's, if not longer. You are frequently cited as an expert on Latino issues and have published numerous reports and articles articulating their vital role in society, like we just mentioned in regards to the workforce and how they're boosting the local, state, and national economy. Tell us about your journey and what inspires the work that you lead.
Oh, Hugo, I'm very much in a reflective mode because I think and for your viewers, I will be leaving my role as President and CEO of the Latino Policy Forum after a 16-year tenure. This kind of work takes a very hard toll on you. And I'm of that age where it's time to pass it off to the next generation. After having really taken this organization from a startup to now really well-established organization with amazingly capable staff and a very large footprint in our state. But my journey began, like I think many others do this work, where at a very young age you feel that sense of injustice. You don't even know the words to call it, to name it, but you know that something is wrong. And personally, both of my parents came from farm worker families. And so in the 60s and 70s, at the height of when Cesar Chavez was alive and the farm worker movement, my mother took me to my first picket line when I was 13 years old in support of the United Farm Workers. And I learned at a very young age how much inequality there was in America in people's wages, and people who labor day after day in the hot sun and don't get to take a bathroom break, don't get a drink of, don't get water breaks. And that really inspired and fueled my activism from a very young age through high school and through college. But it wasn't until after college where I learned about the discipline of public policy. And I was at a job in government as an analyst and realized that everyone had a degree in public policy. And I said, what is that? I'm the first in my family to go to college. I didn't know that such a discipline existed. But what I learned was that was the way to take the issues I was interested about inequality in America, inequality with respect to the Latino community, and get the resources, the tools, the analysis, and the data in order to be able to make a case. Protest politics, I learned, was good, but you also need a research argument and data to make an argument. And that really has fueled my career since in the pursuit and obtaining a degree in public policy and what I've been able to do for most of my career over the past nearly 40 years of applying data and analysis. And that's one of the things I am most proud about with the Latino Policy Forum, and that we lead with the data. And even in this day of are facts real, for those that still believe that facts are real, we can make the case statement of equality or inequality on all the issues that we work on.
Sylvia, huge shoes to fill, leadership that's drawn from lived experiences as well as professional experiences. Thank you so much for investing this time and sharing your insights.
Oh, thank you, Hugo. I always appreciate talking to you.
And to all of you, thank you also for spending time with us. Conversation and collaboration nurture a well-informed citizenry. Until next time.